I'm Tania Rogers, and you're listening to Mindful Hustler, the podcast helping entrepreneurs get out of their heads and onto building their dreams. Together, we're building businesses while balancing minds. Let's dive in. My next guest is nothing short of Black Girl Magic. She is the founder and CEO of Corage Dolls, a company that's on a mission to elevate, educate, and encourage girls of color to shatter societal beliefs and to be unafraid to embrace their full potential. Corage Dolls has a range of products from the signature Aaliyah doll, Aaliyah books, pens, affirmation cards, apparel, home and stationery items, and doll accessory outfits. With Corage Dolls, Flora is on a mission to encourage all girls of color to be unstoppable. So Flora, welcome to the show.
Hello, hello. Hey T, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing good. It's midweek. We're heading into spring soon, so I'm getting the vibe of trying to have the aura of springtime around me. That's the energy I'm going with.
I love it. I will take some of that energy from you. So I want to
Awesome.
start with an icebreaker. Can you describe yourself in 3 words and what would they be?
I think maybe 3 words to describe me. One, passionate. I think, things that I care about and people know that about me, like they will see the passion and the energy that I put into it to bring it to life. Another one, I would say, um, just like action oriented. I'm someone who very much is like, I very much want to take an idea, but also I think an idea is only as good as like how you put in the action discipline, the resources, the capabilities to put out behind it. And so I'm willing to take those type of risk and kind of like test thoughts and ideas out. And so I think like not sitting on something for so long versus just like, let me test it, let me learn, um, and work towards that action there. And then I think lastly, I'm a visionary person. My mindset kind of goes and like, I dream big. Doesn't mean it always is going to come into fruition, but I like to see, there's a phrase of like seeing the forest through the trees, or I forgot what the slogan is,
I know
but
exactly what you're saying.
yeah, I love the idea. And I'm a Pisces, Pisces naturally. And so we kind of operate in this swim lane of like big ideas, but maybe it's going all over the place. But the idea of thinking about things that are very forward and innovative that may not exist right now or not in the way, but see things that maybe is not always being seen, and thinking what can be the big vision beyond. I'm always going off of what's the big idea and the why of what I'm doing. What is it anchoring into? And is there something bigger? I believe that like we belong to something bigger. And when we feel like we're a part of something bigger, it brings the passion. It brings this action oriented thing because you have something like a North Star to lean into.
I'm the same exact way. I actually can't move without that. Like, I am such an intentional person and I need to know. Actually, I think it's called like processing top up versus bottom
Mm.
up. So
Yep. Yes.
I need that picture to move forward versus somebody else might need the smaller details first and then they move forward. One is not worse than the other, but I think it's just a matter of how people think. And so, yeah, I'm like you with that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. That what you just said, the idea of like, what's the higher order that you're falling into? But it also helps, I think, depending on the type of person, like you anchor into like, what are you standing for?
Mm-hmm.
And like, what are you anchoring into? So then you kind of know maybe where you stand within it and the amount of effort you want to give to something, the better you can know how you fit within the puzzle of it all. Yeah.
So I want to know, what was your favorite doll growing up and
Mm.
how did it impact your self-image?
Mm. Ooh, good question. I would say growing up, I had a variety of different dolls. Like my parents, especially my mom, she made sure to expose me to, yes, I had some Barbies. Yes, I had some Cabbage Patch. Yes, I had some American Girl. And ironically enough, The doll that I ended up probably being more associated with was, interestingly enough, a boy doll. It was,
Mm.
I know I never told anybody that, but it was actually the My Buddy doll. It was like a popular doll in like the mid 80s or something. You know, it
I
looked
don't know
kind of
that
like a
one.
Chucky doll. Yeah, you can find it on
Wait,
eBay
not a
now.
Chucky doll.
He wore like overalls and shoes. Like my brother actually had the doll. It was they had a black version and a white version, and I think when my brother started growing up, I just took his My Buddy doll. And I
Mm.
don't know if he had a name, but he just had short, really tight coily hair. And I think I used to like draw on his face because I just had a habit of like rearranging anything with a doll. But it was the first, I feel like, 18-inch plus size doll that I had. It was like a plush doll, but also had a nice plastic face. But when I saw it, because his melanin was like a nice, deeper, rich tone, and I hadn't
Mm.
seen many dolls growing up that looked like that, let alone I
Mhm.
wasn't thinking about the fact that even he was much of a boy doll. It was just the
Mhm.
fact of having this black doll that ultimately just like looked like a cool friend that I could have, and I loved his cool little overalls and shoes and his outfit. And maybe because as I got older, I also started to get like I started watching too much Chucky, and so I started to think that will this doll come to life like Chucky? His outfit does look like it. Anyone watching this, look up the My Buddy dolls, and you'll see the outfits kind of look very similar. That must have been the style of boy dolls in the '80s and early
Yeah.
'90s, but that was really kind of ironically enough a doll that I actually resonated with more because it was like truly a first black doll that I saw that had a hair type that felt similar to mine and just kind of looked facially a bit more like me.
I think that's hilarious, and I will look that up after
Yes.
we're done because I'm dying to
Yeah.
see it.
Please do. Please do. You probably find it on sale on eBay or thrift shops.
So I actually just want to
Yeah.
get more into your origin story. What was the moment or experience that you realized you needed to create Courage Dolls?
So it kind of really started when I was in high school. When I was in my junior year in health class, I was watching this documentary called A Girl Like Me, which was a short film that studied the impact
Oh, I've
of
seen that.
colorism. Yep, a great documentary, short film. And it was during that film that they conducted the very famous doll test or recreation of that. For those who may not know, the doll test was this famous defining test that was originally done by two black psychologists in the
Yep.
'90s, the
Mamie and
Clarks.
Philip.
Mammy and Philip, that was done to study the effects of segregation on young Black children and how they perceive themselves, not having much positive representation, media, being associated with elements that represented them. And the children, 3 or 4 years old, so on and so forth, were giving a black doll and a white doll, and they're asked various questions. Which doll smarter, prettier, more likely to succeed? The children overwhelmingly chose the white doll when it came to anything positive, the black doll when it came to anything negative. And that demonstrated such a pivotal, eye opening moment in the 1940s originally, which was able to help the case to integrate schools during Brown versus Board of Education. When I watched it when I was in high school, it was a kind of a redone version of that test many years later to see like, okay, now it's the early 2000s. Are we still experiencing this same level of self-doubt, low self-esteem, this idea of lack of representation? And the results were the same. So for
Mm.
me, it was like one, this idea of like, I never heard of this test prior to that moment, and seeing these young kids feel a sense of like internalized racism at such a young age. But two, the fact that more than 60 plus years had passed
Mhm.
between when that test was initially done and when they did it again for that documentary. And it's been done again, even still today. And it was just like, how much has changed and how much has still remained the same.
Mhm.
And I think, especially as you think of the time we're living in now, where that question could very much be applicable to what we're navigating with schools and diverse stories and banning of books and this idea of removing anything that's associated or qualifies DE and I in whatever ways. It demonstrates that like we still have ways to go. And so for me, that was really like I didn't know in that moment what I wanted to do with that information, but my mind went to like, man, toys are something that spark joy. They help build your imagination and curiosity. And when I said like those kids, like being so young, for me at least, feel like a sense of internalized racism. I was like, man, how the fact that they're even thinking that they themselves are lesser than just by
Mhm.
looking at the identity of this doll showed me that there is such definite impact, especially as kids are starting to grow up and starting to really associate what's different, color, race, hair, all these things. They start at around that age. And so for me, that was something where I eventually started my business 10 years after that. But it was kind of the spark, I would say,
Mm.
that really was a turning point for me to really think about representation, inclusion, what does that do in the impact of kids in their early development, and how can toys and play be something that helps support that.
I love that. And it's funny because that same study led me to psychology. And I
Mm,
know, yeah, I
awesome.
know
Awesome.
we were talking a little bit about that before, but I just find that it's so relative to how you see yourself, and even further than like less than like you see yourself bad, you see yourself as a criminal. At least that's what these children were saying. Like
Yeah.
some of the questions they were asking the kids were like, which doll is the bad doll, which doll is the good doll, things like that. So internalization is really a thing when it comes to representation and how we see ourselves.
Yes. It is
Yeah.
so critical. And what I've also, and I definitely love your perspective on it, but like what I realize is that as a child, they're probably not fully grasping all of those aspects of that.
Mhm.
But like as you get older, like even as I got older, I saw how I even internalized certain aspects of that, whether it be my hair, my skin tone, my weight, all these other aspects because of what you see. And we know, especially as Black women, how we get portrayed or the lack of positive portrayal and what that shapes, and even with young boys too. But it does have lasting effects. It has those lasting effects. And so it does demonstrate how important it is to connect with the kids early on in their life. Even when we think like those conversations, I don't want to talk about race or things at them at 3, but I was like, they are starting to realize that something's different, or like they are, for this is unique, or this person, this is different, and what does that think about myself in that? So yeah.
So now how did your personal experience shape your mission for your company?
So, my mission with Corage Dolls has been that, I want to elevate, educate, encourage girls of color to be unstoppable. That is at the core of like everything that I do, and the idea of like how is it supporting then the well-being, and then supporting the potential, the full potential of what young girls of color can do, even despite the adversity and obstacles. And I think from that experience, and then from the idea of like when I finally realized I wanted to create a business that one brought joy, one can help, encourage young girls to feel unstoppable, but also something that's educational, playful. And from the period where I took that class to when I ended up starting the business 10 years later, in between of that, when I was still figuring out like what I want to do, I mentored many young girls over the years through different programs and initiatives just to learn about their experiences. What is it like to be a teenage girl growing up today and the pressures of that, or the idea of an elementary school girl? I interned at various toy companies because I didn't know whether or not I wanted to create my own thing or whether or not I wanted to just stick with another company. So I was at Hasbro, I was at Jack Specific. I didn't get to work particularly on dolls or toys, but I worked on like Transformers. I worked on like other big brands to more so learn about the toy industry in and of itself. But what I was still realizing is that like, okay, they don't have many dolls of color. They don't necessarily, the dolls I was seeing was basically just a white doll painted black. So that idea of like, am I seeing authentic representation? Am I seeing the genuine care? Not saying anything against those companies because that wasn't maybe a focus at the time, but it wasn't relating to kind of what I was starting to learn as my mission. And then the last
Mhm.
thing I will say is I also participated and joined a doll club. When I used to live in LA, and I joined a doll club with these much elderly women, elderly Black women in LA. I think they're like the only doll club that exists probably out there. And I learned so much about the history of Black dolls beyond Barbie. so much legacy of Black dolls that were even starting in Europe before it came here to the States. And just the narratives of these women sharing how much Black dolls meant to them, especially when they were growing up. Like these are women who were like in their 60s and 70s telling me their stories. And just being surrounded by that was starting to help me craft as well. Like this is bigger than just this idea of like
Community then.
having, exactly, it's the community, it's the sistership.
Mm-hmm.
And those are important aspects of my business as well, as like as part of this idea of being encouraging girls to be unstoppable. It's ensuring you have authentic dolls that look like you, ensuring you have diverse stories that demonstrate what you're, you know, how much more capable you are. And then it's also this idea of sistership, of having especially other girls and other women of color um, to find community fellowship things in with. And those are just part, the reason I got to that is because of those experiences that I started to have, that by the time I eventually launched the business when I was in grad school, it was up to a point where I was like, you know what, I'm sick and tired of just waiting and not seeing much conversion. And so I was like, I'm talking to all these people, I'm engaging, I'm going to stores, I'm visiting and just seeing what's on the shelves or the lack thereof. And I'm like, it's not reflecting the conversations I'm having or the people I'm interacting with or the stories I'm hearing. And so that kind of bubbled up for me to think about, like, okay, I'm sick and tired of just waiting around for the
Yeah.
change to happen. Let me go do it. And that goes back
Yeah.
to the action oriented.
Yeah, yeah. So now there was a whole 10 years from the
Mm.
idea to the forming the actual business. Take me back to when you first got that idea, because I think so often people don't think that their creative ideas could be a business. They don't even
Hmm.
envision that career path for themselves. So what was that process like for you? You had that
Yeah.
idea and then what?
Yeah. So going back to the components about me, because it fits into the narrative, the visionary. I saw when I was in high school, I saw something that was bigger. I didn't know what I wanted to do with that. Through the experiences of like I said, mentoring, joining the clubs, talking to people, that helped spark the passion for like why this was important, why trying to build my own knowledge of joining toy companies to try to learn and see if that could be my way to influence there.
And
And
were
then
you
the
working
action.
other jobs at this time?
So I interned at a toy company in college, and then I did it
Mm.
again when I was in grad school. But I knew by the time I was getting to grad school that like I knew that like, okay, if I'm not going to stay at this company or be here, like I got to go and work at my business. But it was when I was in working outside when I graduated from college, and I was working in advertising for many years. My background heavily was before I got into retail was very much focused on multicultural advertising. So that was also my way of like, let me build up my understanding about consumer behavior, especially through multicultural consumers, Black audiences, Latino, Asian audiences. And I had a couple years into working in advertising, I was realizing like, okay, like love advertising, love the idea of creative work for other businesses and ideas, but this industry, if you ever worked in advertising, like after a certain age, you feel like, can I keep going in this? Like it's a lot of late
Mm.
nights, it's a lot of just like running around, like you're wearing a lot of hats. But it was this idea of like, if something still felt like it's missing, and what just kept coming in the back of my mind was like, I would go to toy stores during my break sometimes, and just like go to Toys R Us, go to Target, go to Walmart, and look at the shelves just to peruse and just see that like less than 30% of these shells even had dolls of color. And so I knew that I eventually wanted to go to grad school. And I was like, you know what? If I'm going to go to grad school, let me use this time and this period, these 2 years that I'll take, and like, let me actually work now on bringing this business idea to life. Because over those years, I tried many different methods. It wasn't like I just had the idea in high school and then I never did anything. I tried different pathways,
What were those
whether it was like,
pathways?
yes, the pathways of like, if I want to focus on young girls and representation, is it mainly through mentoring and doing that and joining organizations that did that? Is it, working for big toy companies and seeing how I could influence that. And that's what I did, but that wasn't it much for me either. And then is it just like working in advertising in multicultural marketing, which I still enjoy, but like that, I didn't know if it was still like, should it be just toys? Should it just be like, what is a way to focus on representation of girls of color? And like, so that's where, and then I think the doll club kind of helped me build more
Ah,
understanding, especially of Black
yeah.
dolls. And so I
Yeah.
think that kind of was a helpful layer into like, I don't want to just
Yeah.
learn about the toy industry, but I wanted to specifically learn about Black dolls and that experience. And that was the
Right.
only avenue that I was really able to get that.
Right. You know, what you're saying is so parallel to my journey in
Mm,
wellness and starting the Root Studio. I think the art of pivoting and allowing yourself to pivot is so instrumental
mm,
in actually following your dreams. Because I know, at
mm,
least for me, and when I talk to a lot of clients, they're so afraid to pivot and have people see them pivot because then they'll look like they don't know what they're doing.
mm,
And I had that fear. That was
mm.
such a deep fear of mine. But eventually, I just was like, forget it. I need to figure things out for myself and I need to explore and I need to get in
Mm.
like the childlike state and just allow myself to play and the things that I really
Yes.
enjoy. And I mean, for
I
me,
love that.
I quit my job cold turkey. I don't recommend that because I know we're all grown adults and we have responsibility. But I do think that like if you can hold on to some financial stability and allow yourself to dip your toe into things that you enjoy in different ways, it'll really help you hone in and be more specific eventually. And that'll
I
elevate your
love that.
entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I love that as you shared those lessons from your journey, and I very much resonate with you on that as well. Like I did pivot. I pivoted. I pivoted just when I was studying in college multiple years, but like
Hmm.
pivoting, and I think to your point, pivoting does not mean failure. It just
Hmm.
means that you are finally probably learning new information or new experiences that's probably enabling you to go in the next direction. I'll ideally help you on the path you're heading on because, like, as we know, the only thing that's constant is change
Exactly.
and being able to adapt.
Yep. Because we'll continue
And
to
like
adapt. We grow. That's what
100
happens.
100%. And in entrepreneurship, like businesses, can't thrive unless they learn to adapt and evolve, whether it be, through, like still, I think adapt and evolve in like the products or the audiences that you want to lean into. But I think your mission and what's your why should stay
Hmm.
core and the same.
Exactly. I call it the
That is what
umbrella.
I feel.
I
Yes.
don't know if there's like
Yes.
an actual term, but like what is your like
Yes.
umbrella? Because you can pivot in so many different
Yeah.
directions under that umbrella. So for me, it was really just like wellness and feeling good
Yeah.
holistically, mind, body, and spirit, and being able to give that to other people. And that looks like so many different things. Even in the iteration of the Root Studio right now, we do that in so many different ways,
Mm,
and I'm okay with that. And it sounds like you, I mean, I know in your company right now, you have so many ways that you give that to other people as well. It's not just the doll. You have
yes. Yes.
affirmation cards that, first of all, Rogue loves. We
Oh,
play, yeah, we play with them all the
yay.
time. They look beautiful, and you're giving that same service and your mission in a different type of
Mhm.
tool.
I like that. First of all, love that Rogue is enjoying the cards. And but you bring up a good example of the pivot. Like when I was in grad school, was just starting to work on the business. The intention was, like I said, vision. My vision was like, okay, now that I'm really gonna like figure out like how to create a toy company because like I'm not a manufacturer. I don't know how to even draw that well. But my vision was like I want to revolutionize American Girl with the new American Girl. And like what does that look like for this next generation of not leaning into fashion dolls, not leaning into like old time stories of certain aspects of girlhood, but like really relevant today because I was not into American Girl and the fact that the
We,
first black girl,
yeah,
Addie,
was a slave.
yes, was a slave. She was
Let's
a
talk
runaway
about it.
slave. Yes, so that was like, I'm not going to focus on that story of our past time. And then I'm not going to just be focused on like fashion dolls or brat dolls and that aesthetic, but I want to really represent just the everyday girls. Like I was inspired by like the Marsai Martins. I was inspired by Marley Davis. Like there's so many young girls today who are just going out kicking butt and not waiting to sell an adult. So I wanted the dolls, and then I wanted the eventual stories I created. But it was, of course, over time, years later, that I started to think about other elements of girls and their well-being. Other elements, should I say, of making girls unstoppable beyond just the doll in the book, but also their overall holistic well-being. And when we went on lockdown, when I lived in Minneapolis at the time, living 3 miles away from where George Floyd was murdered, that's living on the same street.
Wow. I had no clue. Wow.
Yeah, we can get into that story.
Yeah.
Just seeing, learning more about as well, like isolation and learning more about the loneliness. And still, as kids are coming out of that, but how much that affected a lot of our lives in general. But for young kids who are still very much learning, that for me was just like, okay, what can also be done to help? Well, there was two phases. It was one, me realizing that I wanted to create something for my brand that was giving back directly to the Black community, that I wanted it to be more than just these type of products, but also give back. And that's what sparked Cultivate Courage. And then it was not too long after that then sparked these idea of affirmation cards as a way to provide education, but also well-being support for kids, to support their emotional intelligence, support how they can communicate their emotions, but also learn new positive self-talk phrases. And so, yeah, it was pivots, as you said, long story short, pivots, as you said, but sparked by other experiences that happened along the way and what was just going on in society and how to respond to that.
And so take me back to that process of creating the actual doll. We
Yeah.
had a conversation before, and you told me something
Yes.
about you entered a Harvard pitch.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'd love to get
Yes.
into that again because that was really interesting.
Okay. So going back to grad school, I was originally figuring out, I attended BAPS in college, which is like the number one school in the country for entrepreneurship. So you were joining a program where people who are also very much focused on business and entrepreneurial thinking, if anything. And so I was, took a class that was called Entrepreneurial Thought in Action. And part of it was probably just a couple weeks into first starting at the school. And I participated in this thing called a rocket pitch, where every classmate has 3 slides, 3 minutes to pitch their business idea. And then your class votes on it.
Oh my gosh.
And so they critique it, vote. And this is less than probably a month, maybe less than 2 months into starting my MBA program. And that was going to be my first experience actually like really pitching my business. And I ended up being one of the winners of it. And I remember when I presented, because I didn't have yet necessarily like, what is the full doll? I hadn't yet at the time created the actual doll. I more so like had the concept. Here's a doll I got from Toys R Us that I just kind of changed the hair to kind of just like give the idea of like what I would be thinking of. But it wasn't, I would say that was my minimum viable product. That's, like your MVP.
Yeah. You got to take imperfect action.
Exactly. And so a friend of mine, a classmate friend of mine, he said, hey, you should compete for this Harvard Business School pitch. Like your pitch was great. And I was like, I'm just now pitching for the first time out of my own school. Why would I go to Harvard and compete against those people? It is Harvard. And he was like, he said, you should do it. There's nothing to lose. He's like, all you lose is just, if they don't select you for the pitch, then there you go. Like, you just put yourself out there. And so that encouraged me to just like, you know what? I said I came to this program to really dedicate time and effort and just like be action oriented and do this and test myself. And with his encouragement, I got into the pitch competition. It was a 1-minute pitch competition that you had with like 3 slides and like 1 minute basically, but not really a slide. You had like 1 slide, 1 minute, and you could win money from it. And so it was myself. I remember walking into the conference room where they held, because it was part of a bigger conference the school was hosting, and the pitch competition was just a part of it. That room was so packed. It was like hundreds of people. And I remember standing. Oh my gosh. I was nervous. I was very freaking out. I remember going into the bathroom, probably practicing my pitch like 80 plus times. And you're like, and you got 1 minute. And so you're like, what's the most compelling thing I can tell in 1 minute to get my idea across while at the same time trying to win money and thinking like, and competing against Harvard, like Harvard students. Like you're like,
Right.
and MIT. There were people from other
Wow.
neighboring schools too. And for me, I was like, I want to make sure I communicate my story. Like, what was the spark? And how do and for people who maybe don't have to think about, like, man, I don't have to, for someone who's like, I don't have to worry about not seeing myself on the shelf. So how can I relate to this? What would make me think? And so for me, I focused my story on kind of this image that I saw online of like kind of a black girl looking at a toy store and seeing nothing but white dolls. And then I kind of painted that picture in a couple quick seconds of what that feeling is like and what that internally makes you feel like, even if you're not of that ethnicity, but like walking in and not feeling like you're valued.
That's genius.
And yeah, and then so leaned into that and then introduced what the company is, quick mission of it, the benefit, like what was I trying to solve, problem I was trying to solve, what's the benefits of what Corage Dolls would do differently, and then kind of like a quick call to action. And I think just in that, like you go up there, you present for 1 minute, they give you 1 minute of questions, and then you walk off. And it was like 19 or 20 of us. And you're just kind of going in this conveyor belt kind of line situation. And then I got second place. And it
Wow.
was
Go
just like,
Flora.
thank you. Got second place, got some money. So I got $1,000 for 1 minute of my time, though I took a
Wow.
long time practicing behind the scenes.
Wow.
But it was, I don't try to say like, oh man, Harvard validated that this is, but the idea of like, okay, I could stand in a room, I could demonstrate that like
Hmm.
this is clearly of importance and people can resonate with it. And it shows that like this is a viable business idea.
I love that story so much because it's so important to put yourself in enough uncomfortable situations
Yeah.
to see your grit,
Yeah.
to prove to yourself that, yes, I'm uncomfortable. Yes, I'm afraid. And then when you get to the other side, not only did I survive, I thrived.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you become more comfortable doing things that are scary. That's the only way you can grow. That's what I always like to say.
Yeah, it's like, we are bigger than our fears. And that idea of like what that fear can do to hold us back from ever trying and just doing it and just being like, hey, the worst you can do is fail. And then I don't see it as failure, I see it as a lesson
It's
learned.
not.
And then you
Yeah.
pivot, and then you pivot, and then you like figure out what's the next thing from that. I was so thankful that my classmate encouraged me because I was not planning on that at all. And so having that community,
Yep.
having your
That part.
community, having people who were going to push you, challenge you, because having people who are just like thinking the exact same way as you isn't going to move you
Mhm.
further, isn't going to help in your growth. You need people who are going to challenge you and do it in a constructive way, meaningful way. And there's other people who will just challenge things because like they're doing something in their life and they're just trying to take you down. There's a
Well,
difference.
that's haterism. It's
And I
not
was like, don't
challenging
hate on
me.
me because I've had people definitely tell me like, oh my goodness, your business is not a good idea. Why should you even look at doing
Yeah.
that? And I'm like, just because you're not moving forward in your life and your own idea doesn't mean to come for me. I'm at
Yeah.
least trying.
I want to get into that because I think so many people have unsupportive family and
Mm,
friends who maybe even want the best for them, but they are
yeah.
afraid.
Yeah.
Especially family. I always hear that,
Yes.
your parents or, your partners, whoever, want something different for you. Did you have
Yes.
that experience? Did your parents want something different for
100%.
you?
100%. And so I love my dad, but my dad was, even when I first, because he wanted me, I come from immigrant parents. My mother's from Grenada, father's from
Mm,
Nigeria. And when I went
mm,
off to college, my father was just like, I was initially pre med, and then I changed it
mm,
because I was like, oh, I'm not going to survive this. And I started to focus on business. And I remember him telling me that like business is no place for Black people, and I was like,
mm.
And I was like, what made you think that? And then I had
Mm-hmm.
to, it took probably years later of me having a conversation because I wasn't fully comprehending what he meant by that time. What
Mm-hmm.
he was meaning from his lens is that, when he was back in Nigeria, he had tried to start a business venture. And he was also an auditor and did that. But when he came to the US, it was like, he was kind of starting from the bottom. Like he was working at Burger King while he was going to college and it was really hard to get it, even though he was educated in Nigeria, but it wasn't the same respect of the degree coming to the States. And so when he did try to start something, like it did not go well. And so it was like, okay, like it didn't work out
Right.
necessarily for him. So how can I protect my daughter, I guess you can
Yeah.
say, from
Yeah.
going through that
Absolutely.
same journey? But the phrasing, the wording, it was off. It was not the right thing. And so when years later, when I decided I was going to start Corage Dolls and do that, like that similar sentiment of like came back of like, I don't think is, it's like, like, oh, it's interesting you want to do that, but is that really what you want to put your energy and time in? And that's when I eventually learned more about like, okay, Dad, why are you saying this? Like, what stemmed from it? Like, what is like stemming from you, triggering you as to why me starting a business is a problem? And that's when I learned more about his past and history. And so when I looked at it from that lens, I was like, okay, like first off, I already decided that I wasn't gonna like listen to his negative perspective on that, but it gave me additional context as to why. To a fact, it is like a bit hard. It is harder for Black people, especially Black women, to get like funding. I think less than
Mm-hmm.
0.1% of
Mm-hmm.
Black women get funding for businesses, or even had over $1 million in funding for businesses. And when I was in grad school, starting to pitch more, starting to get in front of potential investors, especially white men, they were like, this business doesn't seem viable. Black people wouldn't spend money on this. Like, it feels like should where are the white dolls, like why is it just thinking about leading with X, Y, and Z? And so I had it even from an accelerator program that I participated in with an advisor, was just like, well, have you considered maybe starting first with white dolls? And I was like, white dolls are the default. they've
Mm-hmm.
always they've always been the default, because she just couldn't see that, like, is there a market
How
for
did you
black
keep
dolls?
going with all those no's, right? No from
Yeah.
your family, no from a mentor who is serving as a guiding light for you. How did you
Yeah.
proceed?
I just, in the probably because honestly, probably because I was in a setting where everybody was also trying to figure out things with business. And so a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people were also going through the nose and going through yeses in different aspects of their lives, that having community, going back to like being a part, like I was a part of an amazing accelerator, another accelerator called the Win Lab. It was Women Innovating Now. And I got to meet some of the most phenomenal people of women who were in the trenches trying to work on their business ideas. And some of them
Mm-hmm.
who have businesses and thriving and they're trying to grow, some of them who are just starting off like me and are just creating
Mm-hmm.
a business plan. I would often go to those events and initiatives and just find community with those other women of like, is it just me? Like, is it just me feeling that like, no one is caring about my idea? Am I putting too much effort into this? It is just a hope dream? And they're like, no. They're like, no, like it is not. Like, you are putting your idea out there. It is, no matter what, you're always going to have people with the naysayers, but there's a lot more people who want to be supportive. It's just finding those people. And you may be in the wrong places in the wrong rooms to get eventually to the right places in the wrong rooms, but this is part of it. Being an entrepreneur, part of it is getting used to that tough love of like people doubting you, saying no to you, especially as a woman and especially as a Black woman. And it was because of that group and that community that I had that I think was really, really pivotal to help me continue going, because I think having other women who are also going through this journey, and getting helpful advice or connections. Like, I got my connection through one of the women in the program to the manufacturer I ended up working with to now create my doll. And so I think community is so pivotal for us as women, that sistership. And it wasn't, and I think what's a critical thing is society always tries to put women against each other. Like, even if you're in a similar industry, even if, so they're like, oh, well, this person's doing the same industry as you, so shouldn't you be X, Y, and Z? Are you pissed off X, Y, and Z? I'm just like, no, we need more dolls out there. We need more. Like, the person who gave me my contact for the doll that I ended up creating was another girl who had a doll business.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I didn't see it as a threat. I was like, hey, I'm not going to gatekeep. I'll share insights that I'm learning with things with manufacturers or contacts and vice versa. And I think that is very important in this
Yes.
industry, is like sharing, finding the genuine community and people you can like really share thoughts and ideas with as you're all on this journey, because entrepreneurship has a lot of ups and downs, and you are learning a lot as you go. Oftentimes, for those of us who've had multiple businesses and they've been able to scale it, sell it, grow it, but for a lot of us, it is learning as you grow and finding the people who don't see you as a threat, but see you like truly as a triumph, and just being able to
Yeah.
support that, I think, is so pivotal.
You touch on a really great point, and I just recently read in a book that collaboration is at the top and competition is at the bottom,
Mm,
right? Like if you want to
yes.
rise and if you want to thrive, you have to learn to collaborate. So yeah,
100%.
I love that. So yeah,
It's so pivotal.
I know we're coming up to our final hour. So I just want to touch on a few more points before you go, because I know you're a very busy woman. So one thing, what is advice you would give entrepreneurs who want to create something meaningful?
Always stay by this, but it's like, what is your why?
Mhm.
What is your why? Like, even as we were talking at the beginning of this discussion, pivoting is part of the journey, adapting, evolving. I'm going right now through the experience of like trying to look into different manufacturers and think about different materials for my dolls because of these tariffs. A lot of dolls are made in
Mhm.
China. That's a lot of cost. I'm going after budget conscious consumers who also are very socially conscious at the same time. They're budget conscious and socially conscious. And I think the idea of like, okay, I went through periods of like, should I not do the doll anymore? Should I not? Because I just can't afford to like all the materials. But I know that when a child is interacting with me at a vendor event and they see that doll, they see that Aaliyah kind of person.
Hey, Aaliyah.
Oh, hey,
For
Aaliyah.
those
There
of
she
you
is.
that are watching us, she's holding up a Leah doll.
Yes. And seeing the excitement, the joy, that feeling of like, I feel seen and valued, and she looks like me. That exact phrase, like, brings me back to that why. And I think you're not gonna get to that until you're getting your thoughts out, get your idea out there. Like, I think we hold on so close and so tight to being like, man, until it's perfect, I can't share this with anybody. I can't, even because if I do, it's real and it's out there, and now I'm accountable to do something with it, or it's like, or they can critique it and shut it down. And I think being just anchored into what is most important to like, why are you doing what you do, and who are you doing it for? Why do you do what you do, and who do you do it for?
Hmm.
And that will always guide you back to what's the impact that you're trying to drive.
Hmm. Oh, I love that. Okay, so now I just have four rapid fire questions, real quick,
Okay.
before we
Okay.
wrap up. Okay, what's one book or resource that has changed your mindset?
Well, a book that I just finished, I'm looking at it in the corner because I just read it, but it was a book called For the Culture by Dr. Marcus Collins. And it literally is a book that teaches you, like, psychologically wise and anthropology wise and just socially wise, like, what is culture, not pop culture. What is culture, and how does that get people to move and behave and take action? If you are able to connect with someone deeply based off of who they are, what do they stand for, then what do they associate with that leans into those ideas and values. If you are able to connect with people in that way, you are able to move behaviors and actions. And
Mm.
I think it is so applicable to the time we live in where there's so many cultural shifts happening.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
I think how we
mhm.
navigate it either as a small business and a person just navigating in the fields of that deal with well-being or just working whether you're in a company. I think it's a great book for the culture.
Love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
What's one mantra or affirmation you live by?
Ooh, there's one um, that I have on my desk right here. It's actually not one I created, ironically enough, but it's called you're not gonna be able to see it as well, but it says, "I make decisions with ease. I know what is best for me." I keep
Ooh.
that one on my desk
Mm.
because in entrepreneurship, you're making a lot of decisions on your own. You're
Yep.
like, do I do this? Do I go this? Do I have money for that?
Mhm,
Do I not have this? And you have to think through a lot. And I think even whether or not you work for your own self or if you work for a company or whatever you do, like
mhm,
sometimes we get in our own ways of
mhm,
things, and it blocks us from like, okay, what is this path if I do this? What is this path if I try that? How can I simplify it and like make a decision and be more decisive? And that's me working on being more decisive versus
mhm.
letting things just linger into the atmosphere. So that's one I like.
What is your go-to hype song when you need a confidence boost?
You know, I always love Jill Scott. And so Golden, Living My Life Like It's Golden is kind of like the
That
one
is so
that it's
you. I love that. Here I am in my head thinking about my song. I'm like, ooh, Annie up. Like, get me hype. But I love I love yours.
yes, yes. I love Jilly from Philly and that song I very much love.
Love that. Okay, and last question before we go. What does hustle mindfully mean to you?
Hustle mindfully. Ooh, I don't know if I've heard that term. I think for me, it means to bet on yourself with intention.
Mm,
Maybe the
mhm,
idea of like hustling, and there's always a debate about hustle culture in general. Like, I feel like
mhm,
it's a part of just the entrepreneurial process because no one's going to believe in you more than you believe in yourself.
mhm,
And
mhm,
it's on you. And so, but I think doing it mindfully in terms of
mhm,
taking moments for break, taking
mm,
moments to pause, taking moments to connect with others, taking moments to pull back when you're too drained, taking time for your family. So I think the old idea of like just hustling and hustle, do or die is an old way that probably has like caused a lot of damage to people's health, their family relationships. And I think now we're seeing this time, and I love that line, hustle mindfully, is like do it, but do it with intention where you are still
mhm,
making space and time for your well-being in it, because if you don't do that, then you can't operate and be truly proactive in the right way in your business. And I think the idea
mhm,
of we can't tell other people to try to like do this and our products will help you in your own well-being, and then we have nothing that we're doing ourselves in that. So, and I
mhm,
think it's surrounding yourself when you need to learn how to delegate, when you need to delegate, learn how to ask for support where you need support, learn to tap
mhm.
into your mentors, learn to just go to your community and bounce ideas off of. So because for a lot of us as women, especially Black women, a lot of us are solopreneurs, and so it is
Yeah.
a lot on us where we are hustling. And then if you're hustling with a family, you're hustling, navigating work, all these other facets. I think that's where the idea of finding the community that you can also tap into to just like lean into for support of your family and just being and just communicating that. Because sometimes I think it's fearful to be like, I need help. I need someone to acknowledge, because no one's going to do that. They're just going to be like, oh, see, you're fine. You can keep going. No, I need
Mhm.
this so I can then take a moment to do this.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that's all I think.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Flora. I can talk to you
Thank
all
you.
day.
Ditto.
And yeah, I love your insight. I think you're brilliant. You're so inspiring. So thank you so much for being on the show. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure doing this moment with you and just like the work you're doing to spotlight us as women through our ups and downs and through business and just like our well being in that process. So, thank you so much. Appreciate this.
Awesome. You can find Corage Dolls online at www.coragedolls.com. That's CORAGE dolls.com, and on Instagram at Corage Dolls. Thanks so much for listening. If you like this episode and you don't want to miss another, make sure you subscribe. See you next time.